Welcome everybody to our webinar tonight entitled The Role of the Football Agent. It is a pleasure to have all of you connecting here for this session tonight. My name is Diego Valdez. I am the director at the Sports Business Institute Barcelona, and I am joined tonight by Malle Koido. Malle is a UK-based sports agent. She is also a course lecturer at the Sports Business Institute Barcelona, and I can see that she's connected here on screen. So Malle, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here tonight.
Hello, Diego. It's great being here.
Fantastic. So Malle, before we go any further, perhaps it's a good moment for you to give us a little bit of an introduction as to who you are and your background and your experience in the football industry.
Absolutely. So I'm based in the UK. And since 2015, I've been working over here as an agent, predominantly in football, working both on the player side and the club side as well. Prior to that, I was involved with Nike Football, working on the advertising and digital sides. So quite heavily involved in producing Nike's football adverts, but also working with a number of Nike athletes that obviously were contracted to the brand. And prior to that, I was working for different federations and clubs, I guess most significantly for Leicester City, whilst we were trying to get promoted to the Premier League. So quite a while ago, again, working with the first team manager and the players and everybody else behind the scenes to make the club success.
Fantastic. Okay, so it's great to have the introductions out of the way. What I'll do now is I'll briefly tell you a little bit about what we do at SBI. So those of you that know us will know that we're based in Barcelona, and here's a picture of our office. And what we do is we specialize in providing executive education for those that want to start, transition, or further develop into a career in the business side of football. We run a number of programs throughout the year. We have our own master's program, which we deliver on a yearly basis. And we also have a course on player intermediation, which is in fact very much linked to what we're going to talk about today. Now, just to make sure that the sound is coming through okay, we like to do this in all of our webinars. What I'd ask you to do is in the chat box, if you can type in the country or the city where you're connecting from, and this will tell us that the audio is coming through correctly, and also a little bit more about where you're coming from around the world. So Rodrigo, hello from Bolivia. Right, Stephanie, okay, excellent, from Miami, London. Jill, nice to see you, Jill. Maria, London, okay. Great, so it looks like we have many participants from around the world, Malle, because we have all continents covered: Europe, Asia, Latin America. Jean-Pierre says he's from IT. Kevin from Massachusetts. Okay, fantastic. Great, guys. Nice to see some familiar names. So what we can do then now is we'll move on to our conversation. It will be approximately an hour. And what we've done is we've particularly selected a few topics that we will be covering. And this should last around half an hour or 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to open it up to your questions. So we're going to have an opportunity for you to ask your questions, anything that you want to ask regarding the role of the football agent. So I guess to start off, Malle, one of the questions that constantly comes up for those that want to move into this space is how to break into the industry as an agent. So evidently, like in any sector, there is no set path, but what would be some tips that you'd offer to our audience tonight as to how to go about and start a career as an agent in the football industry?
So Diego, I suppose we are actually starting with the most difficult question, because obviously, as you said, in some careers there's more of a pathway, in some others not so much. Football agent is probably one of these where breaking into the industry and starting to work as an agent is the biggest barrier for many. So if you think about becoming a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, many other professions, you have a clear pathway where you do a certain qualification, you study something, and then you have an entry-level position, and then you get a slightly more senior position, etc., etc. You work your way up, and then suddenly you're qualified in a particular field, and you can work, and if you're good, then you'll do well. Now, in the football agency world, getting that first break, getting into that first position where you are actually an agent is very, very difficult in some ways. So if you think about agencies, many of them are very, very small businesses. Here in the UK, we have thousands of agents and agencies. Many of them only consist of one person or a couple of people. Obviously, you have a couple of very large agencies as well, along the lines of Soccer or Wasserman Group, and they employ slightly more people. But still, for example, compared to football clubs, compared to law firms, etc., they're small businesses, and thus they're very, very selective regarding who they bring on and who they can afford to bring on. So, for example, if you'd be sending your CVs to various agencies and looking to be employed in some kind of junior position, quite often you don't hear anything back. Or they're going to say, well, we can offer you something. However, it's going to be unpaid, completely voluntary, and we still expect to do quite a lot of time. So that's obviously one big barrier. And another one also in terms of getting in the door is quite often the agents are going to ask you, well, what players have you got? So basically at the point where you're starting out, you're already being put on the spot regarding what clients you can bring in. And that tends to be a bit of a hurdle for many. So you can be extremely well educated, you can be very well qualified, you can have all the sports management degrees in the world, but breaking into the industry and getting that first start as an agent can be very difficult. Obviously, some people can be very lucky with either being in club positions where they can maybe transfer more easily, or being in other positions in the football business where again they can add a bit more value, or where they just end up being mentored by an experienced agent because they can see the potential in them. But these case scenarios are quite rare. So what you'll see quite a lot as well is many people trying to break into the industry and get started as an agent end up actually starting their own company, and then somehow trying to make some deals happen and work their own way up on their own and collaborate with other agents. Definitely a very, very challenging field to break into. And as we like to say as agents, if it was very easy to do that job and make multi-million-pound deals, and everybody would be doing it. So first of all, it's definitely very, very challenging and not clear-cut at all.
Right. Yeah, no, it's interesting because you're absolutely right in saying that there's no clear pathway, and I know there's many agents out there and many top agents, and they've all had different career paths. So good point there. Now, one of the questions that also comes up very often is, well, what falls under a good agent's expertise? Because an agent really has to do a lot of things, right? And what are some of those skills that agents should have in order to be successful?
For sure, Diego, like you've said, an agent has to do quite a lot of different things and wear quite a few different hats. Obviously, if you think about the role of the agent overall, then their job is to look after the client's career. And first of all, they need to have the right kinds of clients. So a big part of the role as an agent can actually be scouting, identifying the talents that they want to work with, and then actually convince them to sign with them. And that's often the most challenging part. Now, something that I feel that every good agent needs to know as well, considering that they will be placing clients in clubs or also working on behalf of clubs to get players signed from elsewhere, they need to understand the negotiations and legal side of it. They need to be good negotiators, credible negotiators who can maintain a cool head when they're being put into a situation where it is take it or leave it. Because quite often you'll find yourself at the receiving end of a chairman or a sport director saying, well, this is our final offer. If you don't take it, the deal is going to fall through. And you obviously still have to try and see through what's happening in the background, What are the other options if this really falls through? What are the players' plan B and C, etc., etc. So that's obviously one of these skills that, to a degree, obviously to some people comes naturally, but also something you can learn and finesse as you go along. But also just understanding the legal side of it. So, for example, when it comes to working with younger players, a very important element to understand is training compensation. And although it's a very common element that affects almost all players, it can still be quite poorly understood sometimes, both by agents and clubs. And people get caught out when a young player transfers, and then it transpires that the club has to pay 200,000 or 300,000 pounds in compensation, which they didn't foresee. That's only one example, but you're going to have a lot of different legal scenarios that you need to understand a little bit, even though quite often as an agent you'll end up collaborating with lawyers, and you're going to end up engaging a lawyer when you do the more complex contracts. You still need to understand the very basics of it. For example, working here in England now, because we're no longer part of the European Union, we have quite different regulations regarding which players can actually come and play in England. And that's something that quite a lot of agents here have had to really get their head around and understand. Because if you're going to take mandates or start representing players who don't actually do their nationality or where they currently play, where they don't qualify to play in England, then that's obviously going to be very, very difficult for you to try and place them in England. And if you find that out after you've committed to representing them, then obviously that's not the kind of scenario you want to find yourself in. But also, obviously, when it comes to negotiating the employment contracts, image rights contracts, yes, of course, you can have legal help in the final detail, but you'll still need to understand the basic premise of the contract you're going into. And you also need to be able to explain this to your client in the human language, so that they understand exactly what they can and can't do on the contract, etc., etc. I suppose another aspect that sometimes goes a little bit under the radar is the effort in terms of PR and marketing. So obviously one side of it is the player's public image and also their attractiveness to brands. And that ties in also with, for example, social media. So we can talk about the very young players in academies, but we can also talk about the seasoned pros. All of them are open to potentially making social media faux pas if they aren't correctly advised. So as an agent as well, you need to ensure that your client is going to retain their commercial value and not get involved in any kind of unsavory stories. I certainly remember working on that side, working on the club side for with quite a few different players, where there was a scandal potentially breaking, or they'd said something in the press that put them in a very difficult position with the fans and the general following of the player. And obviously my job back in the day was to fix it no matter what it takes. And some agents were really easy to work with because they understood exactly what had to be done. And then some agents, because they hadn't really been exposed to anything of the sort earlier, they didn't really know what to do. And quite often their players got caught out in the sense that there would be quite an unsavory story appearing on front pages of the Sunday paper. And then all you could do afterwards is establish limitation. Whereas somebody who is a bit more clued on in these kinds of matters would actually be able to close the story down, stop the story. So that side is also really, really important. Now, when we look at PR and marketing, also from a player's contract viewpoint, sometimes fans can also make or break a player, and their public communication is a crucial part of it. So if a player is sort of well sold at a club, well perceived by everyone, not just from inside the club from performance point of view, but also a real popular fan favorite, then that's going to put them into a better position to potentially renew a contract, get a better contract. So that's also really important. It's not just the fluff and the commercial deals and the boot endorsements, but it's also about simple things like what possible destinations does the player have? and how are they set up in the current club infrastructure. Now, if you think about what agents do in that domain, some agents get very involved. Some agents work with their own media contacts and their own commercial contacts to procure deals for their clients. But also you have other agents that outsource that kind of service to specialist agencies. So, for example, one of my colleagues is doing that work for a certain player called Lionel Messi, and obviously that's very hands-on, nearly full-time work, and the agent in that scenario couldn't do that as well as all the other day-to-day aspects and do them all well, and also have other clients. So if you have a client of that caliber, then it also just makes sense to bring somebody else on board who can be on the call 24/7 and who really knows that field inside out. So I'm not saying that all the aspects of the agent's role need to be done by the agent. There's also certainly aspects that I would definitely recommend outsourcing. But like I said about the legal side, you'll need to have some basic knowledge about how that field works, what are the key do's and don'ts, and at which point should you maybe get someone else involved in order to look after the players' affairs. Obviously, we talked about contracts and placing players and scouting players, and we can't really move past the fourth aspect, which is networking. So obviously, as an agent, your primary selling tool is actually your network. And again, it depends on what you specialize in. So for example, you have some agents that specialize only in the Chinese market, and they look out for the kinds of players that might be looking to come to China. And then they say that they are connected to certain clubs there. And it then means that they don't necessarily need to be working in other 10 markets. It's quite a narrow specialization, but it's about having that really strong network. But then you have agents that cover quite a lot of countries and clubs. So for example, if I think about myself, I work quite a lot with Latin America, especially countries like Colombia, Brazil, to a degree Mexico. I'm also now getting a little bit more interested and involved in countries like Ecuador and Peru. And my network is actually something that some clubs here find really attractive, especially now with the new English work permit system. It is more feasible to contract top players from Latin America directly. And that means that certain clubs are going to ring me at certain times of the year and say, well, we have been looking at player X, Y, and Z online, but we don't know too much about them. So can you find out who their agent is? Can you find out if they'd be willing to come and play in England, for example? What is their contract situation? What kind of salary would they expect? What kind of terms would the club have to sell them on? So just also having that know-how and specialist knowledge in certain countries. But for me also, I cover countries like Germany, Spain, to a degree also top clubs in Netherlands and Belgium along the lines of Ajax or Club Brugge, and also a bit of Scandinavia. Now with your network as well, some people are able to be very broad and maintain a lot of relationships, and some people remain more focused on a particular market and just identify what kind of players they can have access to, what kind of clubs they can have access to, and basically arrange the network in that way. There's no real rights and wrongs. There's definitely certain agents here in England who you call up and they say that they can call up every club in the Premier League and Championship and League One and League Two. And that may as well be true. It's just a question of how these relationships are. But whatever way you approach the networking aspect, there's no way getting around it, because whether your clients are clubs or players, they're going to be expecting for you to provide that network to get deals done. That's absolutely essential. And now we're moving to the aspect of lifestyle management. Now, when we think about lifestyles and football players, obviously we can be thinking about nice cars and exotic holidays, but sometimes it's a lot simpler. So, for example, when the player moves from one club to another internationally, it's also about adaptation, settling in that particular country. If you come from somewhere in Brazil and you end up in rainy London in the middle of January, that's a massive change. Also, if you come with your family, your children, you're going to have concerns off the pitch that need addressing. And again, that's often an aspect that agents fill with specialists. So obviously the club is going to have its role, and for sure the club is going to be looking out for the players' best interests when it comes to helping them adapt and acclimatize. But talking to sport directors, for example, they feel that, especially in the first 3 or 4 months, the role of the agent and the preparation for adaptation is really crucial, because the agent knows the player quite well. The agent will have a long-term relationship with the player. They will know how they might react to different scenarios, what's going to fit them, what isn't going to fit them, what's going to work. And they might also be able to have a more honest conversation around any concerns they have. Obviously, again, moving internationally, you have aspects like the language barrier, which can be hard to overcome. You can start feeling quite isolated. So it's these kinds of aspects. And really anything psychological, because over the last few years, especially, that aspect of the game, again, has gained a lot more prominence. And now you have a lot of players also working with people like mental coaches, psychologists, etc., just to, again, gain that bit of an advantage and do whatever they can to fulfill their potential and achieve high performance. So again, yes, lifestyle management can involve things like organizing fancy events for your player, but at the very basic level, it's just about being aware of the needs of the human being and understanding what you can do to help them. Because if things are okay for the player outside the pitch, they can really focus on their football. If they've got 20 other things to worry about and they need to be sorting out admin for all their family and worrying about how they're going to get their visa and organizing everything all around, then they're going to get distracted. They can't be focusing on the main job anymore. And also, if they're not comfortable in their environment, then that's also going to be something that's going to hold them back from succeeding. So all of these little factors are things that agents need to bear in mind, and they need to have the holistic picture of the player's career. So just to summarize, I'd say 5 things: scouting and talent ID, negotiations and legal, PR and marketing, networking, and lifestyle management will probably be the 5 things for me that every agent needs to master, or at least be aware of to some degree.
This is very interesting because, as you've gone into great detail, there's so much that goes into the role of the agent, right? And then a lot of times people think that, you know, by understanding the regulations or by covering the legal side of things, that's, you know, that's good to go, you're good to go. But there's so much more, as you said, you know, whether it's you know, knowing more about the actual day-to-day, you know, looking at issues that relate to the player and their families, obviously the network that you talked about, and we'll expand on that a little bit further. So there's so much more that goes into it. Now, building on that, Malle, what would you say are the most enjoyable and the most challenging aspects of the role of the agent?
Well, obviously, again, if you look at newspaper headlines, they tend to say the most rewarding, the most enjoyable aspect is the money. I'm going to be honest, there's a lot of agents out there, and not all of them make a huge amount of money. You have quite a few people that only do this part-time, or look after a couple of players, maybe one player sometimes. For me personally, the most enjoyable aspect is just seeing someone achieve the full potential and moving forward in the game and having a good career. And yes, it sounds simple, but genuinely, if you know somebody from the age of 15, 16, and you know that they've come from difficult circumstances, they've overcome a lot of obstacles, they even have a career in football, and then they end up playing for the dream club, that is so incredibly rewarding. It's an unbelievable feeling. And when you support people through the ups and downs, because obviously being professional football can be quite a roller coaster, and then they end up getting what they want and being in the right places, doing well, performing well, and just generally happy with how things are going, that's hugely rewarding. To give you a story here, I was working with a player in Colombia who around the age of 15, 16 was playing academy football. And in the background, there were some very, very difficult problems that he had to deal with outside of football. To the degree that the player sometimes struggled to actually get adequate nutrition in order to cope with the demands of training. So maybe the kind of situation that here in Europe people aren't too used to, but in these kinds of countries can be fairly commonplace. And 2 or 3 years later, with the same player, we were at the FC Barcelona's training ground, which is his dream club, with Barcelona looking into signing him. So when it's someone from that kind of situation to achieving something that they thought was impossible 2 or 3 years ago, that is hugely rewarding, and that just makes you understand why you do that job. So it's really stories like these that motivate me personally. When we talk about the challenging aspects, you need to be very, very persistent, because effectively, not always, but quite a lot of the time, this is a sales job. So if you think about the people that might knock on a door on a Tuesday afternoon, try and sell you this new washing machine that you definitely don't want. Sometimes as an agent, you can find yourself in a similar position, in the sense that obviously your clients go through ups and downs, and they can be at the lowest point of their career. Maybe they've had a year out injured. Maybe they haven't played very much. Maybe they've gone through some legal troubles, whatever it might be. And absolutely nobody wants to contract them. Yet obviously you are still working with a person. You made a commitment to help them through their career, and maybe they have had 6 great years, and now you're on a 7th year, and it's very, very difficult. And you are going to be on the phone, you're going to be on WhatsApp, you're going to be sending emails, and you might be reaching out to 20 clubs, 30 clubs, 40 clubs, and absolutely nobody's interested. Everyone says we have better options, we have something else. It's not really what we need at the moment. And you're almost sort of starting to lose faith in yourself a little bit, in terms of, am I doing a good enough job? Could I be doing more? What else can I do? It can be psychologically very, very demanding to just try and sell and push on and ensure that your client gets a contract somewhere, and not really getting any results. And this might sound like an uncommon scenario, but this can actually also be quite a common scenario. So for example, if you're trying to bring a player from outside the EU into a European football club, that can be very, very difficult. You can be working, for example, with a really amazing talent from an African country. They might be playing for the under-20 national team, and it's still a really hard sell, because sometimes you don't have enough available video footage. Obviously, you have the visa aspect, which can be challenging as well. And a lot of clubs are going to say, well, we have a lot of similar players who don't require work permits, so why should we be looking at your player? And there's quite a lot of hurdles for players from obscure markets to jump through. Also, if you come from a small footballing nation, along the lines of, for argument's sake, Georgia, Lithuania, Iran, countries that don't always produce a lot of players, and you are a nation from the country, and you generally have someone very, very good in your hands. But because they don't come from an established nation, it takes a whole lot more convincing to get clubs to actually even give the player a second look, to properly look at the videos, analyze them, and to even give them a trial, never mind a contract. So that aspect can definitely be very, very challenging. And if you look at today's clubs as well, here in England, a lot of clubs are very data-driven. So they'll be looking at certain markets, knowing that they can find value, knowing they can find high-quality players. And to a degree, they might discard others, which then means that if you are working in one of these other more obscure markets, you do have a difficult job in your hands if you're trying to move players to the major markets. Having said that, if you're actually a local agent in one of these smaller markets and you only work nationally, then that can be a fairly good job, in a sense that you know your local market. You can move players from one club to another and back and forth, and you don't necessarily have to have an international outlook and make the international transfers happen. But yes, basically working with players that are a really hard sell to the clubs that you're working with is probably the one that I personally find the most challenging.
Very interesting. Now, you touched upon this before, and you said it just now as well, that the role of the agent is one where it's very commercial, right? You have to be very commercially savvy, and anytime you're in an operation where you're dealing in a commercial environment, the network is key, and of course that trust that you need to build. So you touched upon this before, Malle, but can you expand as to how vital it is to have a network and to be trusted and to be well known and recognized in the industry when you're dealing as an agent?
Well, like I said before, the network is absolutely vital, and that's probably a reason why players and clubs decide to work with you and not the thousands of other agents who are also available to them. Because beyond no illusions, if you are a player playing anywhere at any kind of professional level, you are going to get numerous messages each week from agents that you don't know from around the world asking if you'd sign with them. So that's the kind of environment you're going to be operating in. The importance of building a network can't be underestimated. And like I said before, it makes sense to be strategic about it. So if you are going to represent a certain kind of player, a certain level, or even if you're going to focus on one particular country, then focus on having a network in that country, in that market first. There's no sort of real benefit in having lots of clubs at different levels all around the world if you're only going to be working with 4 or 5 very elite players. You just need to basically match up whoever your clients are, and then whoever you need to know on the club side to then effectively place that player. It's very much about that matchup. And when we think about the network as well, obviously quite few people coming into the football agency roles haven't necessarily worked on the performance side of football so much. Even if you come from the media or marketing commercial side of football, you're going to have a skill set. You're probably going to have a keen interest in the game and in elements like analytics, statistics, player ID. But you might not fully understand the structure of a club and who you need to know in order to place the players. So yes, you might have some good contacts in terms of people that work in the club. But when we think about the network that you need as an agent, you're talking about roles like sport director, head of recruitment, chief scout, as well as roles like CEO or even chairman in certain scenarios, especially in smaller clubs. You tend to work quite a lot with the chairman or the CEO when it comes to getting deals over the line. In larger clubs, it tends to be more a sport director role, sometimes even head coach, although that's a little bit less common nowadays. And you just need to understand what role all these different stakeholders play and how you can have a credible relationship with them. And it's also so much about the first approach. So some agents are in the habit of having a client list of 40 or 50 different players and just sending a cold email to anybody whose email address or phone number they can get hold of and say, these are my players, what do you think? I think for me at least, and again, that's not some kind of universal truth, it pays a lot more to actually pay attention to the club, how they play, the playing style, the kind of wages they pay, the transfer fees, and having an understanding of where their weaknesses might lie towards the end of the season, towards mid-season, what kind of gaps they're looking to fill. So before you go and talk to somebody from a club, you already have a good understanding of what they're all about, as opposed to just going over to someone, introducing yourself, and basically saying, well, what can I do for you? I think it's very much about being strategic and having more of a personalized approach to the whole process of of networking. I would say it's definitely more about quality than quantity. Yes, you can have a million business cards, but if you haven't spoken to any of these people for a couple of years and you only get in touch with them literally every couple of years to send them your list of 4 names of players, is that an effective strategy? Maybe not so much. Remains to be seen, I suppose. But that's certainly not the way I like to work. And when we talk about the network, it's not just creating network, it's about maintaining network as well. So it's about taking an active interest in the people, the clubs, being aware of their movements as well, because quite often you might ring somebody up and say, oh, hey, are you still at Man City? I was going over your X, Y, and Z. And they're like, oh, no, I left a long time ago. I'm now working in Germany. So obviously, again, just doing these quick checks and understanding what people are doing, where they're going. And when the stakeholders in the club see that you take an active interest, they'll also start reaching out to you. They'll understand what you're doing, what you're all about, what are your strengths, what you can offer. And at some point, you will get into a position where you don't always have to be the one calling the clubs, but the clubs sometimes might be calling you as well.
Good point. Good point. By the way, I see that there's quite a few questions in the chat box, so that's great to see the engagement. We will have an open Q&A session at the end, so be sure to continue to post your questions, and we'll address as many as we can a little bit later on. Now, moving on, Malle, we hear a lot about the agent, and you've given us some insights so far, but one of the things that a lot of times people don't know is what agents do on a daily basis, because there's a lot of work behind being an agent, and as you've said and you've covered already, it's not just about the transfers and signing a contract. There's so much more into what's involved in the day-to-day operations of an agent. So can you shed some light and tell us a little bit more as to what are those roles that an agent will do, or what are those tasks that an agent will do on a daily basis?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand that every player is different and every agent is different as well. So you do have some agents that pretty much only do the contracts and don't do an awful lot outside of it. And that would normally be agreed with the player. That's the way that relationship works. And then you are going to also have the agents that are available to the player 24/7 for years and years on end. So I remember that there was a court case quite a few years ago involving Wayne Rooney and his agent Paul Stratford. And they weren't suing each other, they were on the same side. But Wayne Rooney got called as a witness, and he got asked, how come you pay your agent such a high fee? What does he actually do for you? How can you justify that? Doesn't make any sense. That was affected with the tone and the line of the questioning. And Wayne Rooney said, well, he does absolutely everything for me. Absolutely everything. I wouldn't be able to function without him. So if you think about Wayne Rooney and his ventures over the years, obviously he's played over here in England. He's also played in the MLS. And he's also gotten himself into hot water quite a few times. And every single time where you see Wayne Rooney leaving the site of somewhere where he got in trouble at 3 a.m., you always see Paul Stratford, his agent, personally in his car at 3 a.m., picking him up, making sure he's okay, managing the media, and just making sure that their clients' interests in any scenario are looked after. So it can be that personal. And I've certainly had clients over the years who want to call almost after every training session and talk about how things went, how they're feeling, what the feedback has been from the manager. And I've also had clients with who I almost haven't had any contact for a couple of months. And obviously I've been following their results and checking the games. And then a couple of months in, I might send a message and go like, hey, are you still alive? Are we still talking? Because some players are quite low maintenance and they're generally used to taking care of their own affairs. They don't necessarily need someone to be that hands-on with them and do absolutely everything for them. So again, it's going to depend a lot on the agent and the player. But I suppose the key thing as an agent is to just constantly be on top of your client's affairs, in the sense that you need to see how the season is going. You need to be very aware of their performances. And you also need to be constantly monitoring the market in terms of if there is maybe a potential move for them at some point. What does the player himself want? What are their plans? And you also have to take into account lifestyle factors like, obviously, if you're single, no kids, it's quite easy to transfer pretty much anywhere, anytime at short notice. But if you're a little bit more established and if you live in the same area for 10, 15 years and you've got a young family, it can be a whole lot more difficult to transfer to a very far away location on a different continent. So it's also just taking these kinds of factors into account and thinking of the client as a human being. It's also very much around just being present at games, and seeing who's there, who might be looking, who might be scouting what. Maintain your relationship with the club. So if the club at any point feel like it might be time for the player to move on or even go on loan, or if there is an issue, ideally you would be in a position where you have this relationship with the club where you can be the first calling point. And instead of the club taking some action that might be perceived as against your client, they can be working with you to sort that situation out. I've certainly had situations during my career where, for example, my player has broken their contract quite severely. And obviously the club could have just moved forward and said, well, we're going to cancel the contract because the terms have been breached. But instead of doing that, they actually reached out to me, and we had conversations around what's happening with the player off the pitch, why this may have happened, and what action can we take, what would be fair. And we actually end up reaching a conclusion whereby the player's contract wasn't cancelled. So it's these kinds of things that need to be in place in order to just on a day-to-day basis be able to help the client. But coming back just to the aspects of obviously scouting, negotiations, PR, marketing, lifestyle management, networking, there's always something to do. And also if you're looking after multiple clients, quite often it's also about just understanding what different clubs are doing, what they're looking for. And then if you have a pool of 40, 50 players, sometimes working from the club requirements out. So you might know that a certain club is looking for a striker at a certain price point for a set transfer fee. And you might be looking through a client base and thinking, well, actually, I didn't have a move plan for this player. But looking at that club, that would be a really good fit. And I can start working on that. The agent's work is quite often behind the scenes. So although on paper, what's supposed to happen when the club wants to transfer players to the club, as in if the club is in a buying position, officially what they should be doing is they should be calling the club that the player is currently contracted to and ask for their permission to speak to the player and make an official offer, etc., etc. Now, that actually rarely happens. Agents are very often also used for back channeling. So I know for sure that, for example, if you are in November or December, or even if you are in April and May, and I have any clients who are of interest to clubs, then they will probably call me as the first calling point, and they'll try to find out what the players' plans are, what kind of move they might be looking for, what kind of wages they might be looking for. So during the season, you'll be doing a lot of proactive work in terms of considering the players' options, but also making sure they have everything they need to perform well and generally they stay out of trouble.
Absolutely. Right. Well, moving on, and this is something that has been, in the news for quite a while. Obviously, with the pandemic, things got delayed, but there's going to be new regulations that are going to come into effect by FIFA. To anybody that has been following this in the news, you will know that FIFA has said that they will be implementing a series of changes and regulations, among one of them which will be bringing back the licensing system that we had before 2015. So, Malle, what are some of the changes that we can expect? How will they impact current agents, aspiring agents, and what do you think will be the landscape like when these new regulations come into effect by FIFA?
Well, I'm going to try and keep it brief, but I suppose some historical background here is going to make it a bit easier to understand. So up until 2015, FIFA was the central governance agency for the profession of agents. So in order for you to work as an agent, you were issued a FIFA license, which was subject to you passing quite a difficult exam. If I remember correctly, then about 80% of people taking the exam actually failed. So getting into the profession of an agent, at least from a regulatory point of view, was a lot more difficult. And that was obviously also a filter in terms of making sure that everyone working as an agent knew the regulations, they knew the law around it. And it definitely had some benefits. However, what also happened there was these official agents weren't actually as heavily used as they could have been. So around 2015 as well, only about a third of deals were actually concluded using a FIFA agent. So what FIFA thought of around that sort of time was, well, you have these other people doing deals as well, and they're being paid unofficially. They're being paid either through consultancy services or cash or whatever it might be, but there's money going off the game and we don't really see where this is going. We need to increase transparency. So what they decided to do is they decided to pass the buck on to national federations. So, for example, here in England, the body that regulates the activity of agents is the English FA. So to become an agent here in England, all you have to do, it's a 20-minute process. If you want to become an agent tonight, you can try it out. It's to go online. You have to fill in a form, basically involving your personal details, and also ticking a few boxes around the fact that you're a fit and proper person to carry out the profession, you haven't been declared bankrupt, and you don't have any pending convictions of a certain kind. You need to read through a couple of pages of the declaration, agree to it, sign it. I think you pay about £500 plus VAT at the moment, so that's what you have to pay. And in about 20 minutes, you can be an agent here in England. So we literally have thousands. I suppose from a transparency point of view, it can be good, because when a deal is done, then normally the person getting paid and then a person whose name goes down as having done the deal tends to be the actual person who was involved in it, as opposed to a FIFA licensed agent fronting for somebody else, or also individuals being paid through consultancy fees. However, also, if you think about the fact that it's such a simple and easy process, obviously the standards of agents has probably significantly gone down, because there's no more rigorous testing of the person's knowledge or experience or understanding of the pressure going into. And that inevitably is going to, unfortunately, lead to a bit of a race in the bottom. If you look across the border in Scotland, for example, in Scotland, they don't even have a system where you need to register yourself. Basically, you just turn up on the day of making a deal, you sign the paperwork, and again, you're being taken into account as a player's agent without any kind of checks, any kind of pre-qualifications, nothing at all. So obviously that's been somewhat frustrating. And also, again, if newspaper headlines are to be believed, then agents make too much money. So that's another thing that FIFA are worried about. And the current proposal for reform is that the commissions for agents are capped at 3%. So for context, at the moment, it's fairly standard for agents to take a commission of 5 to 10%. And that can be from a transfer fee, it can be from a player's annual gross salary. That percentage can be based on a number of things. It's not necessarily set in stone, but yes, if you want to cap most commission scenarios to only 3%, and you would only be able to represent one party in a deal as opposed to multiple parties. It may sound a little bit weird for the lawyers among us that somebody can represent more than one party in a deal, but actually that's quite commonplace, in the sense that, imagine I have a player and there is a club trying to buy that player. So the club will then get me to work both on their behalf and the player's behalf to make the deal go through. So effectively, I will represent both parties. And under the new regulations, it will have to be only one party that I can actually represent. So I can't really. It's going to be a little bit awkward in terms of if you are also procuring the deal, then where do you actually stand? Who are you representing? Because quite often the role of the agent is to be in the middle and hold all the parties together and make the deal happen, no matter what happens. So it is a role where it's not always 100% clear who you're representing, especially if you're not working for a player, but you're actually working for clubs and you're trying to bring two clubs together in order to make something happen as well. So a little bit tricky. And the other big talking point, amongst quite a few others, is the return of the exam, which I am actually quite pleased about because I feel like that's going to positively improve the image of the profession. So that if you are a football agent, then you can actually say, well, I've shown that I know a fair amount about the regulations. I know what I'm doing legally. I know what I'm doing with the contract. And I passed the exam, so here's the proof. And it's also really going to be a little bit easier for players to make decisions regarding who should be representing them. Because at the moment, if they are approached by 10, 20 different agents, and they all talk a really good talk and promise all kinds of things, it can be really, really challenging for the player to decide who is actually the best representative. And if there's no additional filter to filter out the ones that don't actually understand the legal space and the environment that they're working in, then it's going to make it even more difficult for players to get good representation. So these are some of the key changes, and at the moment, they still haven't been set in stone. I think the plan is to implement them after the summer window, but the final text of this proposed regulation still hasn't been publicly published, as far as I know. I know a draft is going around different governing bodies and agent representative bodies, but we shall see how it goes. That's the basic top line of the reforms, though. So definitely one to bear in mind if you're thinking about becoming an agent in the near future.
Right. So we've covered a lot of ground tonight so far, and you know, with the questions that we had already prepared, there's so much that we've already touched upon. So we will get to your questions in just a moment, but we also wanted to let you know about our certificate in football player intermediation. This is a program that lasts 3 months, and the next edition is starting on March 8th. So if you're thinking about starting a career as an agent, if you're already an established agent, but you're looking to expand your network, you're looking to learn more about the FIFA regulations, this program may be interesting. I'll just briefly touch upon what it is, and in the meantime, you guys can begin, preparing your questions, and we'll have you come on in just a moment. But essentially, it includes live classes on Monday nights at 8 p.m. local time in Spain, 7 p.m. UK. And what we do is we bring in a speaker, usually every week, whether it's a sporting director or a sports lawyer or a player or agents such as Malle herself and a few others that we've lined up, scouts, people in marketing that have experience, dealing with endorsement deals, and brand managers. So the idea is that you get a perspective from a holistic standpoint. So not just looking at it from the role of the agent, but as Malle said, understanding the other side, the sporting director, the scouts, obviously the sports lawyers. So that's how we've structured the course, and so far it's been very well received. Here's a few of the speakers that we have confirmed, all that we had confirmed last time and already confirmed for this time around as well. So obviously Malle, you see, leading the course here tonight. But we also have other professionals like Daniel G, who some of you may know, author of the book Done Deal and a very well-established sports lawyer in the UK and Europe. Dominic Vieira, who is in fact the agent of FC Barcelona's Ter Stegen. Victor Horta, sporting director at Leeds United. Last time we had Norberto Solano, who some of you, of course, may remember from his days at Newcastle, Peruvian international. Enrique Ripoll, another top sports lawyer that has represented organizations such as FC Barcelona and other top clubs and players in different legal disputes. And Cristian Martin, who's the CEO of Be Engaged, the agency located in Spain. Now, for this edition coming on March 8th, we have a very special guest that we haven't announced yet, and we're announcing today officially. We've been talking to this professional player from the Premier League for a while now, and he's confirmed that he's going to do a session as a speaker for the next edition of the course. And that player is Matt Ritchie. So for those of you that know a little bit more about the Premier League and particularly Newcastle, you will know Matt. So Matt has a very interesting story because he's going to talk about his career. He's going to talk also about the relationship with his agent. So this is a type of insight that you're going to gain in this type of course, that it's not just about the theory and the regulations, which of course are very important to have the knowledge and the understanding, but it's also about creating a network. It's also about gaining insight from professionals that do this day in, day out, and who can answer your questions. So all of this is something to bear in mind if you are considering a career as an agent. The other thing that is very important that we do is we create a WhatsApp group for everybody in the cohort. So Malle was talking about the networking aspect of being an agent and how important it is. You come out with a network of contacts that both do the course with you, and also the guest speakers that are participating. Many of them interact. So there's opportunities for you to build a network. And I saw in the chat there was a question before from somebody saying, well, what do I do if I'm just starting out and I don't have a network, especially, as you said, in the pandemic times? Well, here's an opportunity to start a network right off the bat. So you begin having a group of professionals, many who are already established agents that do the course, and you have an opportunity to connect with them and build relationships with them. Just to give you a little bit of an idea as to where the students that we have come from, you see the map there. Those yellow dots represent countries where SBI has students that participated in this program and others that we offer. So you do end up having a network of professionals that are around the world. And just to give one final slide here, these are just some of these clubs, the organizations that we collaborate with at SBI. So when you do one of our courses, we always aim for you to connect with people in the industry. We have this motto that we've always been very industry oriented. So we try to stay away from the academic side of things, not to say anything bad about academics, but we always like to bring in people who do this day in, day out, because we believe that in order to learn how to operate in this industry, you have to learn from a lot of the people that are doing this day in, day out. Evidently, there's a lot of content inside the online campus where you have access to it. So without going into much more detail, if you're interested, go to our website, sbibarcelona.com. There's the course information. Have a look at it. Get in touch with us. And if you want to learn more, we'll be happy to set up a conversation or answer any of your questions via email. But if you're looking to enhance your knowledge, if you want to optimize your network, and you want to have professionals who will guide you as you move forward, whether it is you're starting a career as an agent, or you want to develop and build more contacts internationally, or grow your business or your practice, get in touch with us, and we'd be happy to engage with you and learn more about your objectives. That said, I do want to get to your questions. So let's get to the chat and have a look at some of these questions that have been coming up. So I see that we have Andrew, David, Shardan, Ramadan. So let's get to a few of them. So Andrew, let me get to you. So hopefully we can get your sound. So I'm going to unmute. I think you have a couple of connections, so I'm going to unmute the one on your PC, and hopefully we can hear you now. So Andrew, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we got you, Andrew. So go ahead.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Malle. That was really fascinating, hour long hearing you talk. That was really enjoyable. What I'd like to know, two things. The first is very simple, is how many staff will a big name modern player have in addition to the agent? Are there a whole bunch of people who deal with sponsorships and PR, social media managers, wealth management? How exactly will a top player break that down? And this is something maybe you can help me with afterwards. I'm interested in the history of agents. Maybe, maybe we can talk via email or something, or you can give me a pointer in the future. I'd like to know about when agents started, who were the first players to have agents, and how the whole thing developed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So when we talk about the top players, the likes of your Cristiano Ronaldo, your Neymars, first of all, it can be a little bit hard to distinguish who is actually working for the player on the agent side, and who is actually part of that looking after the player group. Because at the very top level, first of all, players tend to have the family members quite close, and the family members also tend to a degree at least, look out for their interests and take care of certain affairs. But if you look at some of the key aspects, then for sure they are likely to have somebody looking after the social media, because as you can imagine, Cristiano Ronaldo won't be on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook all day long. And I know for sure from my time at Nike, when it came to his social media posts, there was a whole process around it. There were obviously multiple stakeholders chipping in and editing and looking at how things should be done, as opposed to the player just organically going on and putting something out there. That's not how it works at the top level. Again, if you look at endorsements and just public image, you might maybe have a separate agent for the commercial sides, speaking to the brands and dealing with brand activations. And you might actually have a different person who is looking after their media, because that's actually quite different. Obviously, people working outside of the media marketing bubble, they might think it's all the same, but it's actually fairly different in the sense that working with brands is very much about the endorsements and the contracts and activations, and creating cool ads, whereas the media side is very much about giving the right interviews, but also answering things in the correct way at press conferences, even receiving training on how to speak to the media. It's all these kinds of things that come together. Also, we can look at aspects like just managing the player's schedule, managing diaries. So you might have someone like a personal assistant looking after that. When we look at the aspect of, for example, wealth management, insurance, and all of this, I would say they wouldn't necessarily have somebody working for them full time, but they would have an advisor from an external company who they can tap into now and again, just to make sure that everything is ticking over the way it should. And again, that tends to be something that the agent has some oversight, has some involvement in. But the agent isn't necessarily a specialist when it comes to managing investment portfolios and assets. So I would always say in anything like this, try and contract it out, and have a real specialist dealing with that, as opposed to trying to do it at home within your own means and trying to figure it out, because there's quite a lot at stake. They might also have a lawyer, again, somebody who's not working for them full time, but someone who's on the side, who's available when the services are needed. Potentially linked to a full service law firm, because obviously lawyers don't cover all the aspects. They might only be covering, for example, contract and employment law, and if it comes to family law or anything along these lines, they might have to tap into somebody else in the firm. But then we can also look at lifestyle aspects. For example, psychology, personal fitness. It's almost an endless list, in the sense that if you want to be a top player, you'll be looking to gain every advantage that you can, and focus on these marginal gains of being 1%, 2% better than everyone else. So whatever resource you can really tap into in order to achieve that, or what's going to make your life easier off the pitch, you're going to go for it. But these are really some of the examples that I would give. On the agency side, if you think of a full service agency setup, then you'll probably be looking at the agent, then somebody more on the admin and player care side, just making sure the players have all their needs met. Someone on the commercial side, and then probably someone on the media side. But again, every agency has a slightly different setup. But these are normally the roles that agents try to cover in-house, and then they would be contracting specialists from the outside to then chip in various aspects. Now, when it comes to the history of agents, that's actually quite a fascinating topic. I'm more than happy to send you a few links. But actually, if you think of the first agent in the world, then funny enough, it's actually a Brazilian/Uruguayan gentleman called Juan Figer, or Juan Figer, as you would say in Brazil. And he's still active. So I think he's into his 70s, or even early 80s now. And I've had the pleasure of meeting him in Sao Paulo, in his office, where they have sort of like a nice family agency set up, and still represent Brazilian and other players. And obviously he's had the pleasure of working with players like Pele and Maradona, and during a completely different time, where obviously we've been talking about analytics and platforms and the availability of information, and how it is literally everywhere, and how it's now about finessing and finding the good information. Now, back in these days, you didn't really have endless video highlights and Instat and Yscout, and even international phone calls and emails, and all of that was a bit of a novelty, really. So back in the day, it was very much about the agent being the trust person between the club and the player, and the whole process was taken an awful lot longer, but definitely an interesting time. So if you want to maybe just get in touch with Diego after this, and more than happy to send you a few links and insights and articles.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, we'll put our contact details in just a moment, so stay tuned for that at the end, and feel free to email us and we'll get in touch. Okay, so in the interest of time, we'll take one more question, and I think Sharan had his question up from before. So Sharan, same thing, we're going to try and get your microphone working, so let us know if you can hear us, and you should be able to speak now. So Sharan.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, we got your sound.
Perfect, thank you so much for the platform, it was very informative. I'm trying to get my head around how agents get paid. Are there commissions taken out of the player's salaries, or is it a separate fee? And is it paid by the player always, or is it by the club always a different scenario? Thank you.
Right. Again, that's something that varies country by country, and it's also something that can vary depending on the kind of agreement you make with the player and the club. So what's common here in England is that the commission isn't paid by the player, it's paid by the club on behalf of the player as a taxable benefit. So that obviously sounds a little bit complex, but just by brief way of explanation, normally the agent fees and that amount is kind of worked into the initial contract that's made with the club and the player. I would recommend also to have a look on a very good YouTube video by Daniel Chi, who is actually going to be one of the guest speakers in our course. And if you type into YouTube, how do agents get paid, then that should be one of the first things that pops up. And that's going to explain in quite a lot of detail how they get paid. Now, again, it's different country by country. So you are going to have countries where, due to the tax system and the way that generally football is organized, the player does directly pay the agent after they receive their wages post-tax. But also bear in mind that agents don't only work on behalf of players. They also work for clubs at times. So, for example, when I'm working for a club, then let's say I'm working on a transfer, but transfer fee is £1 million, then my commission doesn't form part of the transfer fee, because if you read through the regulations, then the parts of transfer fee can't be actually taken out from a transaction. The agent's commission in this case scenario would be a separate payment entirely. But yes, I would recommend, if you want to have a good detailed insight into that, have a look at the video on how agents get paid. And also, if you're going to read Daniel Chi's book, which I believe, Diego, everyone who is actually going to join the course is going to receive, then again, in there's quite a lot of information around the different ways that agents get paid.
Great. Well, thank you for the question, Sharan. Those are some great points, great questions from everybody. So what we'll do now is we'll wrap it up for now. As you will have seen tonight, Malle has gone into quite a bit of detail into the role of the agent. Hopefully tonight you were able to take away some insight, whether you're already working as an agent, as we had a couple of agents that came on and were already experienced, or you're looking to break into the industry. Here we just had, what is it, an hour, 19 minutes with Malle. So imagine 3 months, experts like Malle and others that are coming in, answering your questions, providing this type of value. You really come out with a lot as far as knowledge, understanding of what the industry is like for agents and what it entails to represent players. Not just the theory, but like we said, the practice, the day-to-day operations, and having access to professionals like Malle, just as you've had this hour to ask your questions and to, go through some of the points that we've discussed today. This is what we do in the course, 3 months. And not only is Malle in every single one of the sessions, but we also invite, like we said, Premier League sporting directors, club scouts, top elite professional players, people that have endorsement deals with brands like Nike, Adidas. So if you're looking to get that type of relationship for your clients, we bring in those professionals. So basically give you a prism and an understanding of the role of the agent that looks at all the aspects that you would need in order to be successful. The course starts March 8th. There's still a couple of weeks to get onto the program. Malle mentioned Daniel G. and also Enrique Ripoll. These are sports lawyers that come and answer your questions for an hour. And these are people that, if you wanted to access them on a one-on-one basis, you'd probably be paying a large fee for these types of sports lawyers and other professionals like the ones we've mentioned already. So if you are thinking about, a program like this to level up, to upskill yourself, to become a professional agent and to get an understanding as to how to get started or how to develop further your business, get in touch with us. Let me put our contact information here. Oh, sorry, we didn't have that slide with our contact information, but I've put it in the chat. I've put the email. So sorry for that. Apologies. We didn't have the slide with our contact added, but I'll retype the contact email where you can reach us, which is contact@sbibarcelona.com. Get in touch with us. Let us know if you'd like more information about what you've heard tonight. And in the meantime, if you are thinking about joining this program, think about a family that you're going to be joining, because we always believe that it's not just about doing a course for 3 months, having access to the people that deliver it like Malle and some of the others that we mentioned. We believe it's about creating a community. It's creating a network for you to optimize your opportunities, whether it's now or further down the road, as you grow and as you develop your career as an agent. So that said, we want to thank you for your time. We appreciate you all being here tonight, listening to the insight that we shared on the role of the agent. We hope to hear from you soon. If you are interested in the course, get in touch with us, because there's still a couple of weeks and some spots remain. And in the meantime, we look forward to engaging and connecting with you in one of our future webinars as well. So from my end, I'll say thank you on behalf of the SBI community and team. And then at this point, what I'll do is I'll just turn it over to Malle. So Malle, your final words before we wrap things up for tonight.
Guys, thank you very much for joining tonight. It's been really interesting. Also, the questions were really good and really on point. And I suppose even coming onto the course and engaging in some of the guest speakers, the practice engaging myself, I've certainly found that during the last 2 cohorts, I've even learned new things from the guest speakers. Obviously, we have people like Victor Orta, Premier League sporting director, who is going to tell you how they feel about recruiting players, what they look out for, how they work with agents, what they expect from agents, what makes a good agent. But then also people like Dominic Vieira going into a fair amount of detail on what it's like to work for a top international playing for FC Barcelona. what it's like to work on the commercial side of that, and what are some of the aspects that he would take into account when considering market situations in countries like Germany or Spain, or Enrique Ripoll going into a huge amount of detail in terms of working with minors, staying within the regulations, and achieving your goals, protecting yourself, and achieving the best for your clients as well. So it's a really, really good course, and I look forward to seeing many on it. Just a couple of weeks away now.
Fantastic. So yes, get in touch with us. Let us know if you'd like to learn more about this program starting on March 8th. And we look forward to hearing from everybody. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Malle. See you soon. And to everybody, good day, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you're connecting from. So all the best. Take care. Be safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye.